Again, this is developing 360-degree constituent perspectives. Really excited to share our approach and methodology and what we mean by that. So just a little kind of our agenda and our overview. I'm going to start off with kind of highlighting the current method to how we think about connection, engagement, etc. And there's definitely some strengths to it, and it has some gaps, some pretty significant gaps. And I think gaps that, for whatever reason, we've spent a lot of time just not addressing or choosing to ignore. And I think it's leaving a lot of opportunity on the table that we're not able to access because of this approach. So I'm going to give it kind of an overview of where the majority of the industry is, maybe your organization is as well. And then I'm going to share kind of an additional approach that really can provide a 360 perspective and is really rooted in behavioral economics as a framework to really capture engagement. And then finally, as I mentioned at the top, I'm very excited that Rebecca Scott's been able to join us from Tufts University School of Medicine, and she's going to share her perspective of these concepts in action and then how it actually impacts her work as a fundraiser and overseeing engagement and alumni relations at Tufts School of Medicine. So really excited about this conversation, and let's get going. I always like to start, we're thinking about current state, or just about actually any analytics presentation I did. This is analytics related or analytics adjacent, just kind of giving a definition, my definition of what analytics is. And maybe hopefully this can help you put into context some of these ideas. It's really just human insight at scale. That's what analytics is for me. That's the functional definition. And it helps me kind of approach my work, shape my work, communicate my work. And so what do I mean by that? So if we had a constituency that had, 4 people in it or something like that, we don't really need all sorts of methods around understanding engagement and connectivity and scoring. And we would just have 4 people on an Excel spreadsheet, and we'd be able to look at it and figure it out, have a strong cup of coffee, get together, meet, and come up with a plan. But that's not the reality. We have thousands, hundreds of thousands. Some of you may have millions of people in your database. And so human insight can't scale like that. We are very powerful with a very finite group of people. But once we get beyond kind of the people that we immediately know or can think of, it's very hard for us to have line of sight into who they are, what we think they'll do, and how they feel. And so analytics more broadly is here to help us kind of scale what we would do if Rebecca and I could look at 50,000 people all at once and divine some insights that can help us fundraising. So just as a kind of a framework setting, that's what analytics is, human insight at scale, no matter what kind you're doing. And I also want to talk about these terms connection and engagement. So you're clear when I'm discussing this, what we really mean. And so I hope it doesn't become tricky. I'm not trying to be, Funk and Wagnalls, those are the guys that make the dictionary about this. But when we talk about these two terms, they're often interchangeable, or they're often used to mean the same thing in the industry. From our approach with BWF, when we talk about this work, connection is who you are and what you do, and engagement is what you perceive and how you think. And so there definitely can be related, but they're separate components. And the stuff in the red is what we're going to start talking about. This is the stuff that we traditionally record and track within our CRM or our fundraising database. And this is kind of the genesis of where connection as we understand it today. So current state, connection scoring. So a lot of times we're trying to say, hey, we want to see, who's into us, who likes us, how warm are people. Sometimes they call it a warmth index. We build connection scores. I build connection scores. I build connection scores for Rebecca. So these are not bad things, but they have some limitations. So let's kind of walk through what we see when we build connection scores. Again, if this is built upon who you are and what you do, we're somewhat limited towards the data that we track and store and value within your CRM, whatever platform you're on. So we're tracking things like giving, right? Amount, count, recency, all these kinds of things. What I like to call the special relationship with your organization. So for Rebecca, it would be medical school alumni. If it was Mass General, It might be patients. If it's the Los Angeles Philharmonic, it might be season ticket holders. But who are the people that have kind of the markers of the unique relationship that's aligned with your mission? Those are often common elements. We track activity. Are you coming to events? Are you serving on a board or a committee? Are you volunteering? And then we track kind of what I like to call externality data, which is data that's outside, that's like giving to other organizations or where you live. So there are gaps with this approach. And the gaps that this approach drives us are what I really want to talk about filling in today with an engagement approach or an engagement plus connection approach. And so the real gaps that we see is within just about every client I've worked with, most of their constituents in their database are not donors. So if we're building a score that highlights giving, and giving is important, giving is definitely a tangible measure, what happens to the people that are not giving? Do we just assume that they're all not connected and they're not going to be connected for forever? I think that's an important question to ask. I think we think about the special relationship. Most of our alumni are not donors. Most of our patients are not also donors. Most of our season ticket holders or members or people who've attended are likely not also donors. So we value these things, and I understand they do have value. It is important to understand alumni and people who've made gifts. That's great, but what are we doing to help understand a larger audience beyond the people who are already doing the most right now, right? So activity, what's our target audience? Is it broad or narrowed? Are we democratized in how we try to reach out and engage with people in non-fundraising ways? Or do we likely work in a very focused way? Okay, there's nothing against that, but what happens to the people that were not even eligible to attend or we didn't target and invite to participate? We might be discounting their connection and activity, even though we didn't give them an opportunity to become engaged. And then we talked about the externality data, just where people live or giving to other orgs or they're older, that might be corollary with some outcomes, but I'm not sure it's very causal. And these are also things that we cannot control. So connection scoring is important. I recommend every organization develop scores like this. Certainly it's core to a lot of the work that we do here at BWF, but we also need to understand that it's really recognizing, and you get into this kind of feedback loop of highlighting those who are most active. And it really offers very little line of sight and opportunity to identify activity on the 75 to 85% often of our constituency who are occasional, one time, or have never made a gift but are in our CRM. So again, to recap, connection scoring is great at highlighting and bringing those most active to the top, but actually most of our constituencies, regardless of your mission, higher ed, healthcare, environment, the arts, majority of the people that are in our constituencies are not really doing a lot of stuff. And so while a connection score can tell us that or reflect that, it doesn't tell us where the best opportunity is among the occasional donors or among the non-donors. We all know they're not doing very much. Well, we want to grow. Who should we talk to? Who should we reach out to? Who should we focus on? So again, connection isn't bad, but I would argue it's really a 180-degree perspective. It's 50% of this donor 360. So I'm going to go back to this image that we were sharing at the beginning. When we combine who you are and what you do, along with what you perceive and how you think, that gives us an opportunity to really have a comprehensive view of our constituents. It gives us an opportunity within behavioral economics to align the irrational and the irrational, one of the, or the emotional and the logical side. One of the great things when Rebecca and I started doing this work together a few years ago, she always talked about getting a major gift. You have to get two yeses, right? You have to get the emotional, I'm excited, yes. And then they actually have to figure out how to pay for it. That's the logical, rational yes. I believe it's the same thing in annual giving, right? Which is why, people give for the first time, not because they're an alum and they have to give, or not because they're a patient and they have to give. They give because they're moved emotionally to support your cause. The second time they give, they kind of do a Yelp review of that first gift and they say, you know what? I gave to Mass General last year and that was good and they shared and my gift had impact, I'm going to do that again. And that's the emotional side, the engagement side, and the connection side coming together. And that's how we get loyal donors. That's how we get major gift donors. And so what we're talking about today and sharing today is an approach to saying connection isn't bad, connection is good, we should all be doing it, but it is only half of the picture. So how do we develop a 360-degree view? Now that we know there's this stuff in the database that we can track and measure, it's important, but it doesn't show everything. And it has huge blind spots for all the people that we think could do something, but are currently not. And so the way that we can do this is to really think again about perceptions and opinions. And so for us at BWF, or certainly within my practice and with the decision science practice, philanthropy, again, at its core, it's an emotional economy. And so we track who people are and what they do, but what I'm suggesting is if we spent more time understanding how they feel, that's why they're giving. They're not giving because of who they are, they're giving because of how they feel. And so I think, again, with this core definition of analytics as human insight at scale, organizations have a significant opportunity to start to develop or improve upon their ability to understand how our constituents feel, along with who they are and what they do. And this is really going to provide lots of new opportunity and line of sight. And Rebecca has some great examples of that to share later. This allows us to really move into a new area, which I'm super excited about. I was talking to some friends at a major research university a couple of weeks ago. I was talking to a top cancer center last week. There's this conversation happening now about the donor journey or the constituent journey. And so as we mature in our use of data to help us fundraise and grow our mission, people are starting to think of beyond just individual actions. Who's going to give next year? What's the next major gift? Those are important. We're starting to say, hey, what are these things tied together? How do we connect them together? And what's their relationship? And once we map that out, what are things that we can do to amplify and accelerate that? And so again, it's not all just about because you give, you're going to give again, or because you gave more. If we're not doing the accompanying and effective work around driving and promoting sentiment, this is how people feel about the organization, which then allows us an opportunity to get people more engaged, which is how they perceive and how they feel about you. So engagement's not what they do, it's how they feel. And when we start to map this out and really unpack and understand this, this allows us the journey. And so if people like Alex come into our organization, and we know that if we can amplify these sentiments with Alex, it's significantly more likely to make him engaged. And if he's more engaged, he's significantly more likely to do all these donor-related things that we really like. And these journeys become clear to us, and it provides lots of opportunity for different groups within an organization: marketing, communications, grateful patient, alumni relations, stewardship. They all have their clear path towards fundraising production, and it's not just the wonderful fundraisers like Rebecca of the world that we focus on. And let me just kind of show you a little bit of that context and why there's opportunity there. So again, observed activity is a shorthand, but it has blind spots. And he's given me permission. I've been using Dennis and kind of picking on him as an example for a number of years. This is my colleague, Dennis. He works here at BWF. He's a consultant. And Dennis is a proud, very proud this week, alum of Texas A&M University. Gig'em Aggies beat Alabama. It's fantastic. And I was meeting with some folks at the Association of Former Students at Texas A&M. And I was like, hey, do you guys know my colleague, Dennis? I was like, well, let's pull him up. And he's a super loyal donor. He's a President's Diamonds or a Diamond Century Club donor, and he's been a donor for 25 years at this level. And they were like the association, and he's a top person. And they were like, oh yeah, he's one of our most engaged alums. We love Dennis, whatever. And then I asked Dennis, I said, Dennis, how do you feel? And how engaged are you with A&M? And he said he's a 2 out of 5. Might be higher today because they beat Alabama last Saturday, but he said he's a 2 out of 5. And so the organization thinks he's fantastic. And there's opportunity to engage. And Dennis is doing all this stuff and he feels like he's a 2. Imagine what his his interaction and support of A&M would look like if he felt like a 4 or a 5. So he's a 4 or 5 to the organization. He doesn't feel like it. And they have no idea. They're just looking at the connection of Dennis. He's giving a lot of money. He's doing it very annually, doing it in a very loyal way. They're just kind of leaving him alone. He's tapped out. He's reached the peak of his engagement because of what he's doing. And there's so much more left. And he's in a blind spot for them because not even the non-supporters, as a top supporter, they still don't quite capture how Dennis feels about the organization. So that's kind of some of the blind spots and the opportunities that we have if we start thinking about these things in combination of each other. Again, connection is great, it's just incomplete. And engagement itself is great, but we also need to know the relationship between how people feel and what their actions and outcomes are. And so this is this concept, again, of the 360-degree view of our constituents and how we can have more line of sight into opportunity among those who are currently not doing a lot of stuff, and also highlight the opportunity, and I know Rebecca will share some examples of the Dennises or major gift owners or major gift prospects who you think feel fantastic about you, and when given the chance, because of their actions, they don't quite feel the same way you do. And so these opportunities exist. And so again, we talked about the idea around understanding sentiment, which then drives engagement, which drives all these things that we really like. I want people to give, volunteer, become a member, come to events. We can map this journey out and see what's going to accelerate individual people and groups of people, which provides a whole new perspective and opportunity to really have influence on that journey and try to drive the maximum relationship with your organization. Another added benefit, I think, to this approach is this really highlights how important marketing, communications, donor relations, alumni relations, grateful patient, stewardship, because these are the people that are driving, by and large, at scale, these sentiment opportunities, right? So Rebecca's very important. Rebecca's a very successful fundraiser. She works over here in the activity end and she closes the gift. But Rebecca would be the first to tell you she closed the gift, but the team has been working for 10 years messaging and communicating with this prospect or this donor, starting out before they were a donor, then they became a donor in the Leadership Annual Fund, moving up to becoming a prospect, and Rebecca being able to secure a significant contribution. All these people have played a part along the way because they've been driving these feelings, which drive engagement, which drive philanthropy. Now we can highlight this. And in fact, Rebecca's going to share a few slides that say, if we can move a small group of people, move the needle on how they feel, here's what we can expect in philanthropy. And sometimes the results are very surprising for constituents. And as we talked about at the beginning, our ability to spotlight the irrationality in our database. Just because people do a lot, like Dennis, doesn't mean they necessarily act or just because they act in a certain way doesn't mean they necessarily feel as strong as you think they are. And just because people love you or say they love you doesn't mean that they're doing all the stuff that we like to track and record in the database, like giving, for example. And so these are the real opportunities within our constituency to identify this imbalance. Organizations do not need my help identifying their very top people who love them and do lots of stuff that they like. You guys already know who you are, and you know who those people are. But there's between probably 20 to 40% of your constituents, they would be on this X of they love you. They say, oh, I couldn't imagine a world without. And then we look in the database, or as the kids say, we check the receipts. We don't see a lot of stuff going on. And that's an opportunity to activate that. So they have strong feelings, they're feeling engaged. That's the group of people who aren't doing stuff. That's who we should start to focus on, because that's our greatest opportunity. And likewise, for people like Dennis, we should go back and revisit them, right? So they're doing the things we love. How can we make sure that they feel as good about us as we feel about them? And so there's opportunities for stewardship there. And so there's this hidden group. And when we just look at what people do and don't do, we can kind of cast aside and not find these opportunities where people love us and have yet to do stuff, and where people do a lot but don't feel as strong. So this irrationality, which is kind of core to behavioral economics, is that we're the logical and emotional side, or rational and irrational side. our ability to be able to highlight and align these two things really allows us to say, we have maybe 200,000 people who aren't donors. Well, of that, maybe 40,000 are likely to become, if we can understand who we think or who does or we believe has strong engagement, those are the people that we can activate. And then talk a little bit more about the journey and our ability to find accelerators. So we can uncover not only like, oh yeah, we know that people that care about us or like us more than not like us, they're more likely to be engaged. Well, not all sentiments are created equal. And so for different constituencies or even different groups within your constituency, certain things make people more likely to be very engaged. So for example, if I said I couldn't imagine a world without the University of Minnesota, it's essential to me. I got a great career there. I have so many friends from there. If this place wasn't, I couldn't imagine this place. This place is core to my identity. If you said you were a 5 on that, you were 11 times more likely to say you were very engaged. Not a huge surprise, but that's a huge accelerator. So what are the messages that are going to drive engagement versus what are things that, well, pride drives it, but it's a lot less because everyone's already proud about our organization. So if we can tap into people sharing the impact of what we're doing, or if we can remind them of the impact that we've had on their lives and how core we are to their identity, and they couldn't imagine a world without, that gives us a significant opportunity to drive their engagement. Well, so then what does that do? Once we drive engagement, we all know this, it's not a new paradigm. The more people are engaged on average, the more they're going to do. We all know that. I'm not saying more engaged, give more. This is not some earth-shattering new approach to understanding fundraising, but we can measure it, and we can measure it in very specific ways. And that impact is significant. So if I know what's going to drive Alex to becoming more engaged, I can focus on that message for him over the next year. And then I know that once he becomes more engaged, I think he will become a loyal donor. He's 7 times more likely to become a loyal donor, or he's going to give us a lot of money, or he might put us in his will or estate plan. So you're significantly more likely to do all these things, and we can measure this. So we all know that relationship's there. To understand how much it is, we can start to uncover this and really, again, highlight the donor journey, the constituent journey, and what are the things that's going to accelerate someone from being a name in your database to maximizing their potential and philanthropic support. So there was I think maybe a question about kind of how we approach this kind of concept. And I'm a big fan. I used to work at Gallup. Some of you who've met me know I used to work there. It's through directly asking, how do you feel about us? Could you imagine a world without, are you proud to be affiliated with our organization? Do you have confidence we're going to deliver on our mission? These are questions that we can directly ask people, quantitative questions that allows us to provide this engagement side to what our constituents say. And even with survey response rates not being 100% or even 50%, we can then model those responses across a larger population. So if Rebecca took a survey and shared how she felt, and Emily didn't take the survey, but she looks a lot like Rebecca because they graduated at the same time and they both are the same kind of inconsistent level donors and they both live in the same area, we can impute that Emily might feel the same too. So we can get these macro level insights to understand the impact on engagement, to understand, we can project support for next year, we can see how out of alignment we are. And then it really provides some micro insights as well too. So it's not, we don't need to look at everybody at scale, but Rebecca's going to talk about in a minute, we uncovered some people that we thought were feeling great about Tufts. And it turns out they're just kind of so-so. And it was a big surprise to us. And it provides opportunity to follow up and connect with folks and kind of get understanding around that. So that's a really high level overview around connection versus engagement, and kind of how the two together are very important to giving you a 360-degree perspective. And so I think you probably be best served by hearing from one of your peers in the industry. And I'm excited to have Rebecca join us, and I'll be happy to drive the slides, but she can talk a little bit more about this work and kind of how it's been working at Tufts.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks for having me. Yeah, we have been using this tool for a little bit, about 2 years now, maybe a little bit longer. And Alex, if you want to go to the next slide, I'll start with talking about what prompted me to look at this as a tool that we could use. And what really caught my attention was how we could use this tool to measure the success of our non-fundraising activities. So we spend a lot of time and a lot of money on alumni activities, reunion events, trying to get people to volunteer, writing stories, getting stories in the magazine, sending out stewardship reports, sending out annual reports. But we really never knew what of all these things was the most successful, or was it successful? And that also meant we were never very available to, or it was never very easy for us to choose what we should do more of or what we should do less of, because we have a limited amount of time and we have a limited amount of budget. But stewardship in particular is always a growing activity, and we just felt really stuck because we didn't know how to make choices. And so what this tool allowed us to do was to take the temperature of our constituents, regardless of whether or not they're donors, take the temperature of our constituents over time. So we set about using this tool twice a year, and we're using it for multiple years. And on aggregate, that gives us an engagement score. So we can look and say, we still can't really tell which of our activities are necessarily the most successful, but on aggregate, is our programming creating engaged constituents? And is that engagement increasing or decreasing? And now that we have this tool in place over time, if we do choose to make a change, and we choose, for example, to add a new activity, or we wouldn't really actually choose to cancel reunion, but let's just say we cancel reunion, we would have the measurements of before and after a major change to say, okay, engagement has dropped, or okay, engagement has increased. So I think that's one of the things that's where we started in terms of what this could accomplish for us. I think in particular, our stewardship and donor relations staff were really excited to be more data driven, because as we get more gifts, we always have more reports to send out, but there's still a desire to do special stewardship or different stewardship. So what she has done is pulled out the engagement scores for everyone who receives a stewardship report, for example, and then compared those people's level of engagement to the population that responded to this survey but does not receive a stewardship report. And what she's looking for is some data evidence that people who receive stewardship reports are more engaged. And that evidence gives her confidence that this is an important tool and the reports are at least contributing to general engagement. Oh, wait, there's one more on that slide. So that was the other thing that I sort of didn't realize we could do, but I have loved, is the opportunity to ask one-time relevant questions. So now this is good for the next slide, because one of the things we did figure out as we dug into our data is that volunteering in particular was a key driver for engagement. So I don't know if this would be true for other places because our data is particular to us, but when we looked at who were our most engaged, biggest donors, the commonality we found was that they were also volunteers. That meant we could choose to focus more of our alumni relations program on creating volunteer opportunities. Every time we do the survey, which is a 12-question survey, we have the opportunity to tack on 1 to 3 additional questions because volunteering looked so interesting. Our last survey was all about volunteering. And here we learned that really what our constituents want to do is they want to mentor students and they want to talk about their medical specialties. So this isn't sort of like a revelation to us. We weren't shocked that that was true, but it gives us confidence that this is the right focus for our work. Perhaps not shocking, they also don't want to ask their classmates for money, but we sort of knew that too. But and they were interested in connecting through events, so it does also give us confidence. But when you put it together, 45% of people of our medical school alumni and constituents want to talk to current medical students about their specialties, and they want to mentor students. So we're really in the process of building out those volunteer opportunities on the basis of this data. All right, then what we realized and what Alex helped us see is the relationship between engagement and philanthropy. So what started out as a tool for the non-fundraising aspects of our program has also become a tool for annual giving and major giving, because Alex could connect for us that the more engaged someone says they are, the more engaged they identify themselves as being, the better donor they are. So one of the things that we love about this is it also makes very clear the value of alumni relations and alumni engagement, because they are now connected inextricably in the chain between the start of the giving and major gifts. They're like completely tied in a way that cannot be broken at this point. Alex, did you want to chime in about my inextricable chain?
Yeah, well, so again, we could highlight, so we did a thought experiment. We said, let's take everybody says that they were a 2 right now, and we know what their average lifetime giving is. And what happens if they would feel like they were 3s? And you can actually see the difference in the lifetime giving among those groups, right? So the more engaged you feel, the more you've given on lifetime. But we move the needle on just slightly more than 150 folks, it could be $1 million in the next 5 years, and it could be over 100 million lifetime when we get legacy commitments and other things into it. And so it's an estimate. It's not a guarantee. It's not a prediction, but it allows us to say, you know what, we want to do this project to work on these folks who are important to us, but they said they're not engaged, and we want to find more people like that. And this investment might cost, I don't know, $100,000 to hire new staff and whatever. We think the return could be X, right? And so we can start to estimate what that ROI would be from investing in marketing, communications, alumni relations, stewardship, all these kind of the more softer activities that are not hiring more principal gift officers like Rebecca.
Well, in this case, we've done exactly that, but we haven't really spent any money in particular because, we have about 14,000 constituents, about 10,000 of which are alumni. So if you look at this chart, Alex is talking about 164 people of our data in our database in particular who are represented on this chart in particular. So we didn't feel the need to sort of do mass anything with this group. We just looked at those 164 people, looked at who was a 2, who was a 3, who was a 4, and basically we set up some engagement opportunities that kind of culminate in a meet and greet with our dean as a major gift qualification activity, but targeting those people in particular because we want to get to know them. We are also going to target those people in particular with additional volunteer opportunities, going back to the previous slide, because we also think that's a big driver. But those 2 things didn't cost us any money to kind of make the change on who we're focusing in on. At a base level for major gifts, the other activity we did was we just make sure everyone who's a 4 and a 5 is assigned to a major gift officer. So just to make sure we're not really overlooking somebody who talks about being very engaged and has major gift potential. So that's also been useful. All right, next slide. So this has also been very interesting in terms of how we've used this data, because in Alex's previous slides, you saw that there are a number of different, in addition to saying how engaged are you, and people rate that between 1 and 5, there's a series of other questions that are a little more nuanced. And one of those questions is, how proud are you of Tufts University School of Medicine in this case? And for us, actually, that turns out to be not a particularly useful question. We are very lucky to find out through this survey that the vast majority of people are very proud to be affiliated with Tufts University School of Medicine, whether they're donors or not donors, or even in some cases, regardless of how else they feel, that pride piece is very, very strong. You see in this chart that it is very, very strong in our top donors, but it's really very strong across the board. So what that gave us the opportunity to do is to look for a different tool, a different lever to pull to try and increase engagement, particularly as it relates to giving. And in this case, we identified 2 areas where if people gave us a higher rating, that was correlated to a higher level of engagement, which would be correlated to a higher level of giving. And those 2 areas were, do people share news about the medical school with other people? And do they promote their affiliation with the medical school with other people? So one of the things we're doing next is we're trying to better understand how we can make it easier for people to do those activities, so that people in general, not just the people who fill out the survey, but everybody can do more of those activities as a way to increase engagement, which is a way to increase giving. We're starting with our campaign committee to use them as a bit of a focus group to better understand the ways in which people share news about the medical school and the ways in which they promote their affiliation with the medical school, so we can figure out how we can support that.
Yeah,
I think that, yeah, go ahead.
I was just saying, and this just kind of highlights the dentists that we were talking about, right? So these people are 6-figure donors over the last 5 years. That's not an insignificant amount of money. I don't care how well off doctors are. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. And these people are very generous in support. And then we ask them how engaged they are, and they don't quite feel like how we think they would. If we just did the connection only approach and someone gave you $325,000 over a 5-year window, I'd be like, yeah, they're pretty connected. They must be really into us. And then we asked them, and they gave themselves a 2 out of 5.
Right, or a 1 out of 5.
Or a 1 out of 5.
Yeah.
And then we were also talking about a little earlier, kind of there's the macro insights, or what are the things that people are into, talking about specialty, mentorship, et cetera. This has given Rebecca and her team opportunities to say, hey, whoever this person is, thanks for taking the survey. I was kind of surprised that, I appreciate you sharing, but you're a 2 out of 5. I thought there was a deeper connection here. Help me unpack that. What do I need to learn about that? What would it take for you to feel like you're a 5? You're really generous to us, and we've started this new thing because of your generous support. And it's important for us that you feel that you mirror that, or we do our best to make sure that you mirror that. What's going on there? And so these results have given you, Rebecca, isn't that correct, kind of opportunities to follow up and have some discourse?
Yeah. And once again, we really treat this major gift data and this at the very individual level. So we just would pull out the people who said, who didn't say they were a 5, and target them for additional event or one-on-one activities or opportunities to connect with the dean or volunteering activities, or sort of we can really, and as Alex said, the survey is not anonymous. So if we choose, we can reach out to people and say, tell us more about like what you were thinking, not what you're thinking, but your thinking behind that answer. But we can also just kind of pick people for different activities based on their results and just kind of give them a bespoke experience that's like a little more invisible to them.
Yep.
here's where, and this was kind of surprising, I think, Alex, when you did this work for us. And it does show a lot of potential where we didn't think it existed. We have a significant number of people who do identify, who give, but yet say, who rank us as 1 on the engagement scale. So you would expect that the more engaged people are, the more they would give. You wouldn't really expect like a bunch of donors who say they're not very engaged. So this gives us another target population, because the people as identified on this chart who are giving but say they're not engaged are a group that we can pull out, because surely they would give more if they said if they were more engaged or identified themselves as more engaged. But they're already doing what we want them to do. They're already donors. So I think, to your point earlier, Alex, this is a group that we otherwise just would have never have identified. We would have ignored them.
Yeah. Again, because we just look at what they do, we go, oh, they're fine, they're great, they're giving all the time. Well, actually, there's a lot of them who give every year, who surprisingly, you would expect this number to be over here. You would expect the line to go like this, right? And then the loyal, for that purple line, and the loyal donors to be the most engaged, and et cetera. And they kind of mirror what we're seeing from the constituency overall. So there's not the relationship that we had anticipated, isn't quite bearing out from the data. And so then it becomes an opportunity to say, well, why?
Why? Yeah. So, yeah, and well, to summarize, at at the program level, at the non-fundraising activities, we use the aggregate scores more to measure, to take the temperature of engagement over time. And then when it's come to major gifts, we really dig into individual people's responses, and then we can tailor kind of groups of people or major gift activities, or accordingly, we can put people into cohorts, we can assign them, we can invite them to things, but we take a more individual approach for those major gift prospects that respond to the survey.
So I hope that was kind of a helpful elucidation of some of this approach, or the benefits of adding engagement on top of connection. And thank you, Rebecca, for sharing that. So, I should have put in a conclusion slide in here. I went right to the discussion. I wanted to chat with folks. But again, just kind of to recap it, connection's great, but connection's kind of only half of who we are. And we're not always what we do, and we feel and think different things than what we do. We do that every day. And that's just kind of the beauty and mystery of human behavior. But within philanthropy, the emotional economy, there's so many opportunities for us to understand how people feel, and then understand the relationship between that and then what they do and how they act. That there's a new kind of approach to us once we add that other 180-degree perspective. And I hope Rebecca was able to kind of illuminate just a few of the things. We've had countless conversations and offshoot projects, and this is serving prospect development and fundraisers and marketing communications and alumni relations and stewardship, and all these different groups have been served just from even not a very big amount of data, asking a few questions twice a year. So really hope that we've been able to kind of share the excitement around this approach and this methodology. It's not replacing connection, it's a yes and to connection. And really welcome if anyone has any questions. There's a Q&A function it should be maybe at the bottom of your screen. We'd love to answer any questions you have. I know there's one from Tracy had a great question about kind of our methodology. And she said, if a survey is not anonymous, does that impact survey response? And that's a great question. And Rebecca and I had this conversation 2.5 years ago, and we have this conversation all the time. But my answer to that is pretty resoundingly no. And the reason I say that is we live in a survey culture. You can't do anything. You can't buy anything online, take an Uber, order a pizza, go to Amazon, go to a restaurant through Open Table, whatever, without someone being like, hey, how'd you feel? How'd you do? How was this? Did you like it? Blah, blah, blah. And so we're so used to it. I think that a lot of kind of the wariness about it has gone away from folks. There's always going to be a few folks who are concerned about that. Our surveys are private for Tufts. So Tufts gets this data and they know who said what. we don't share it with anybody else. It's not our data, it's their data. But building a private survey versus anonymous allows us to be able to link up what people say with what they do, and then it allows me to share that data back with Rebecca. And so I can say, hey, this person's giving you $328,000 and they in the last 5 years, and they said they're a 2. I want to be able to tell Rebecca who that person is and not just hold that over her head and say, oh, sorry, I can't tell you. So there's anonymous, which means we don't know who said what, confidential, which means I know, but I can't tell Rebecca, and private, which is how we approach this work. And we've seen no difference in communicating that in terms of impacting the response rates.
Well, and let me add, we do send out an email in advance of sending the survey to both let people know this is a real thing coming from the medical school, and to give people a chance to opt out if they don't want to get it. And the survey does say, you know, this, it says explicitly that this is not an anonymous survey. So we're not trying to hide that fact in any way. So we've had about 10% response rate every time we've done it, which we feel has been really good.
Yep. Travis has a great question about kind of a little bit more on the survey we send out looks like. So I worked at BWF for about 7.5 years, and I got that 7-year itch. And I went to industry and I wanted to do different stuff. And one of the places I worked at was Gallup. And a lot of people think about Gallup as polling, but Gallup's actually a management consulting firm. And that's where they make their revenue, a considerable amount of revenue on, is doing work like this. And so using methodologies and a lot of the things I learned about behavioral economics and survey design from Gallup, you know, we work with Rebecca, and we developed an instrument that is we have 12 questions. Is that our limit? They're all
except 12 plus the bonus questions.
Yeah, except maybe like a ranking question or something. Everything is Likert scale 1 to 5. The survey is designed to be taken in 2 minutes or less. It's designed to have a very light digital footprint and give us quantitative data when we correctly develop questions that capture how you feel. So like, you know, asking someone a question, though, is just important to you, is kind of clumsy. Or if you said, hey, could you imagine a world without this institution? That's a different way of, you know, without kind of being direct about it, getting at that sentiment and that feeling that we're looking to identify. Yeah. Hey, great to see you, Jennifer. I'm glad you're here. My old colleague, Jennifer Svias, is joining us. She's fantastic. Patient experience surveys, we have looked at them. We find those to be more SAT surveys, and satisfaction and engagement are like cousins, but they're not the same thing. And hopefully I can explain this very quickly without being confusing. Satisfaction is a measure of a moment in time, and engagement is a broader, more ephemeral feeling. So think about like maybe an actor you like, or a restaurant you love. And I'm going to go see every Tom Hanks movie that comes out. But I could go to a Tom Hanks movie and the movie stinks, or I hated it, or I didn't like the performance. So my SAT with that movie, very, very low, but I'm still going to go see the next Tom Hanks movie. Or I had a bad meal at my favorite restaurant. Well, you know, how was your experience? Oh, it wasn't very good. Or I went to go see my favorite sports team play and it rained and they lost. And I spent a lot of money and it was just a lousy experience. I'm still going to go back. I still love that team. I'm engaged with that team, but my patient or my sport event satisfaction, or my restaurant diner satisfaction, or movie attendant satisfaction, or patient clinical experience wasn't very good. You know, there's good doctors and bad doctors, and good visits and bad visits, and that's not super predictive of how someone feels. And, you know, it can be kind of a leading indicator, but it's not a great replacement. We have used this data with other hospital systems to help us identify potential grateful patient donors by saying, hey, these are patients who say they also are very engaged with us, and this is their kind of clinical profile. Who else has similar clinical profiles we think and would be most likely to be engaged? So patient experience surveys are important, but they're asking us to measure a very finite thing, that last visit, the nurse that happened to be on shift who you may have never seen before. And those are important in clinical settings and care settings and I understand why that's effective. But in terms of understanding, like, are you going to go home and wake up thinking about it in a positive way? It certainly wouldn't be a leading indicator of it. It could be maybe an indicator of like someone had a bad experience and are like less likely to be engaged. But that patient stuff is same thing with post-event surveys, important, but their satisfaction, that's not engagement in what we're talking about. Well, I appreciate the time and you know, being able to get 52 plus minutes of your day to connect with you all. Rebecca and I have been really excited to talk about this. We were going to go, was it the week everything shut down? Was that our first kind of road show?
Yes, it's true. We were excited to go present at the Case Drive conference, but in March of 2020, that did not happen. So,
sure.
But now that we're presenting now, more data, more things to talk about. So it's kind of more interesting. I'll say that a couple of the extra survey questions that we added to the surveys we have done when we when COVID sort of hit and we really didn't know what was going to happen. One of the questions we asked people is, are we one of your top 3 charities? And so from a giving point of view, that's been invaluable to know. And, you know, generally people who replied to the survey told us. In fact, and you can imagine getting back to the question of confidentiality or anonymity. Yeah. If someone feels like Tufts University School of Medicine is one of their top 3 charities, they're probably not really, they don't really care about anonymity. They're really proud of that fact and excited about that fact, and they're not necessarily trying to hide that fact. They're already donors to us. So that was really useful info to have.
Great. Well, thank you, Rebecca. I'm glad we finally got an opportunity. We're 18 months later to kind of share some of this work that we've been doing. It's been really collaborative, and I really appreciate Rebecca's support. She's a fundraiser. She's not just like an annual giving alumni relations person. She's out there on the front lines where the greatest money is. And it's been really exciting to kind of team up with her and apply this not only to the broader communications and sentiment, but also how it relates to major giving. Again, we really appreciate you all joining. Look forward to opportunities, hopefully in the coming year, to have these discussions in person. And if you have any questions, please feel free to follow up. I'm sure you're going to get a follow-up email from us thanking you for attending. Obviously, I'm always happy to talk shop about any of this. So if there's anything else that we can do to help you understand or learn more, we welcome that conversation and hope everyone has the great rest of their day.